Hi everyone, welcome to the React Native Show podcast. With me, Łukasz, who is me, and Michał Pierzchała, our head of technology. Hi Michał.
Who is me? Hello.
I am. Okay, let's start this. I want to talk with you about performance optimizations, which is our topic at Callstack for several months now. We have released the ultimate guide to React Native optimizations few years ago, and then few months ago, we re-released this as an ebook, as an updated, extended version of the V1 guide. And I don't know if you remember this, but me and you, we were a part of the performance optimization tour in the United States. We went to the US promoting the guide.
Yeah, so I think it rings a bell.
I had a great time with you and with all of the community. We have visited San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Detroit, and I've met great people from the community. We have exchanged experiences, and it was great to chat with all of the folks out there. So during those events, we presented some news from the React Native realm, talked about metrics you should track in performing your React Native applications, and each event ended with the Q&A from the public. And during those Q&As, we tried to answer all of the questions, but there is only so much time during that time, and we were unable to answer all of them. Some were left unanswered. So today, I was thinking we could gather all of the questions that were asked during those Q&As and answer them here for everyone to listen. What do you think?
Yeah, awesome.
Are you up for it?
Did you actually gather all the questions?
No. Actually, we removed some of the questions that were presentation specific, and we just left like the general performance questions that I think might be interesting. Yeah. So
before
we will start in a second, but before I want to do a quick announcement that in case you need help with performance or other React Native related issues, reach out to Callstack, reach out to us. And as a team of experts, we can support you with all of the things React Native. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Let's answer some questions from React Native performance realm. Buckle up. Question: which performance metric do you think causes the most impact on user experience?
Yeah, I think there are two metrics that are like the most important to track. This is the TTI, which is time to interactive, and frame drops or FPS, depending on what devices you're measuring. So I think these two are the most impactful, and the rest that we talk about, like app size or CPU or memory usage, they usually contribute to one of these two.
Yeah. So basically, when user can see it, is impactful to them for what they can see. So frame drops.
And there is like time to interactive. We usually refer to that when bootstrapping the application, like mobile application or web application. But we can also measure the time to specific interactions in our app, like pressing a button and how fast will it navigate us to some other screen, right? So there is more depth to that. But when we talk time to interactive, we usually mean the boot time.
Okay, I think that covers it. Next question. Have you experimented with breaking your JavaScript bundle into multiple packages and downloading, linking them as needed?
Yeah, have you?
I have. I used Repack. Repack is developed at Callstack, but this is not a strictly performance optimization tool. Usually you use those kind of techniques to achieve some other goals like super apps or mini apps.
Yeah, and also like if you React Native is pretty specific to that, especially if you're using Hermes. It memory maps your bytecode bundle and allows you to only load the necessary code into the device memory. So it's like already optimal in this case, and it only makes sense to code split an application if you load this code remotely from a server, right? So if you have a use case for that because your app is too big, for example, or your app is too big and you're a super app, right? For example, and you work with multiple teams that need to work separately. There's more of a like solution to scale problem instead of performance for the users. Apart from just like app size that could be big if you don't split your huge application that have some services that some of your users don't use.
Yeah, like you can download huge JSON files on demand if most of your users don't need them on the startup time, and those can slow down your applications as well. But yeah, that's the example that I can think of in terms of performance.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're talking about web development, for example, it wasn't a question about it, but like the code splitting based on browse or features like a default with many frameworks like Next.js or Remix. So you definitely want to do it there. With React Native, it just doesn't make much sense in most cases because there are cases where it makes sense. And I think like Expo Router is a nice case where they use those experimental Metro features for loading code, like lazy bundling code, which is particularly interesting from the development point of view. So it helps you not execute the JavaScript in the development time. That's not really used, but yeah, still not very visible improvement from the user perspective.
Okay, let's move on with another question. With respect to time to interactive, are there any tactics for improving first-time render times for screens components as opposed to re-render times?
Yeah, I mean there are multiple techniques, right? So we can use for Hermes. We can, which is the default right now, so you probably already use it. We can defer the fetching of data or prefetching some data for the next screens. What
either
else?
fetching or logic, right? If you need to do some heavy calculation, you can either pre-do it or post-do it, but don't do it at the same time as rendering is happening.
Yeah, and it's like easy to do some unnecessary computations with hooks sometimes because they're like so easy to use and they hide any complexity out there. So you may not be aware that those hooks are doing some work whenever you're rendering something in a React component. So it may affect your mounting rendering, like first time render time. And I think like there are very specific cases where you need to squeeze like the every bit of performance for specific scenario. Like you have a list that needs to be 120 FPS on all possible devices, and in such cases you may want to be creative and in terms of providing two versions of your component, like low fidelity component and high fidelity when you enter the part of the UI that needs this kind of information. So yeah, sometimes we gotta be creative, and it's not only about React Native or JavaScript. I think it's it's also what developers in game dev are doing with fogs and all of that.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to libraries. Is there a JS performance telemetry library that is a one-stop shop? Is there an application performance monitoring dashboard that is most useful for React Native applications? So I think,
So where is it?
well, I would start by saying there is no one-stop shop, because we have a spectrum of things that we want to do, and like the most obvious split point for that is development time and real-time usage. So you want to measure your applications during development time so that you have the fast feedback loop and you are able to catch all of the performance implication of your code that you are actually writing right now. But you also want to be able to check how are your users see your application, how do they perceive this. So so because of that, you have to use different kind of combinations, different kinds of tools to really capture all the spectrum.
So speaking of specific tools, like in the real-time or runtime spectrum, we can use Firebase or Sentry or like many other analytics solutions that have built-in performance capabilities. This is specifically the case with Sentry and Firebase. They're really good at it, and there's for the dev time we have what we have. Like on Android, we have Flashlight, right? We have React Native performance. There are many tools and libraries named React Native performance, and they're coming from different creators. So here we can use one from Shopify, which will allow us to hook into the specific markers of React Native and rendering pipeline. And we can instrument our app, send this data somewhere to Firebase, for example. And we also have this Flipper integration from Joel Alderson or Oblador on GitHub. And he has like a Flipper extension that also measures those performance markers for React Native.
For the dashboard part of this question, I guess if you are using the real-time metrics, you have dashboard embedded in Sentry or Firebase. But when you are talking about development tools, make sure to plug it into your pipeline so that you have feedback loop on, like PR on, or like nightly master builds, so that you can monitor that and you have the historic data for your
your Git repository. Flashlight and this Flipper tool from Oblador is they all have UI where you can inspect some performance metrics visually, and you can also write down this data and visualize yourself however you like.
We forgot about one library, which is the most important because it is ours, the Reassure. Yeah.
You can also use Reassure.
We have an episode about that. Go listen to that episode right after you listen to this one. We're gonna link it in the show notes. I like the next question. It's really fun to discuss and talk about. So let's ask the question. Is it worthy to use onFreeze globally to try to improve performance? What's the onFreeze that you enable globally, Michał?
Yeah, this is a question about React Navigation's use, like enable onFreeze prop for on specific screens where we can use React Native freeze with React Native screens
Yeah,
implementation
I
so
think,
that
sorry, I think you started answering this question from the top, from React Navigation, and I actually think we should we should approach this question from the bottom. There is this library called React Native Freeze, which allows you to freeze your components on parts of your application and not allow it to render. It's really, really small. You should check out the code base for that one. It's really a nice piece of functionality. This is used by React Native Screens, which is used by React Native Navigation. And React Native Navigation is, of course, the most popular navigation library in React Native. So that's how you get this like low-level functionality of freezing parts of your app inside React Native Navigation, which is React Navigation, which is really nice.
Yeah, and the prop is named freeze on blur, and that's what it does. It's worth to use it. Just know that if you haven't, make sure that you test thoroughly for any unexpected side effects that you may have relied on. And yeah, that's like it.
Yeah. So what does it do actually? What are you enabling by doing this enable global freeze? Or
I mean, it automatically integrates the freezing, which is like using React suspense mechanisms to pause the like React rendering. So if you have a Redux actions updating everything globally,
that's the answer. You answered my question. What does it do?
Yeah.
It opt out of rendering if you are not using the particular part of your application, and it does it automatically on blur navigation, which is great.
Yeah.
Next, are there low-end devices that should not be supported? How do you draw the line?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually, if you have a good telemetry analytics around your users, you'll be able to know like which users are bringing you the most money, or which you care about, or whatever. You're the one that knows who to support and who doesn't, who's not really in your interest group. So that's up to you, basically.
Yeah, you should have it in your analytics. Next question. What is the most common type of performance issue that you've encountered with your clients? I can answer this. It's a JS thread, and more specifically, re-renders on JS thread. We are talking about it in our Reassure video. Go check it out. Next question.
Re-renders are the most common causes of excessive loading time, and yeah.
Yeah, next question is actually a really nice one as well. Newer phones have dynamic refresh rate. How would you measure FPS in those situations?
Yeah, so with dynamic refresh rate or variable refresh rate, we talk about screens that can dynamically change how fast they're refreshing their screens. So, for example, iPhone 13 Pro can get to 10 hertz, like from 10 hertz to 120. So instead of measuring FPS, which is frames per second, you may want to, and you actually do want to focus on frame drops, which will give you a rough idea on where your JavaScript or UI threads stutter.
Yeah, so you should not be measuring FPS, but dropped frames. What are the preferred techniques to break up work on JS side to achieve high frame rates? There are different angles to this question, right? So what I can say right from the start is it was story time. It was really weird for me to see reanimated sometimes popping up with some libraries that don't use, like, they're not really UI libraries. They don't have anything to do with UI, and they are depending on reanimated. And why? Because reanimated has this use worklet directive, which allows you to split the JS work between like several different threads
Yeah.
or something like that. I'm not sure if that's correct, if it's correct to call them different threads, but this is just
so
yeah.
So normally in React Native, JavaScript has its own thread, and worklets are run on the main UI thread of the operating system for iOS, for Android. Windows is not supported, for example, probably because it's tricky, and yeah. So and it's actually pretty performant out there. So if you want to break out, use break up some JavaScript work. Use reanimated, use native driver in regular animated library. Use interaction manager. Sometimes it makes sense. There are specific use cases in React navigation where you can run some of your UI changing code to be scheduled after the UI transitions of the React navigation. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that the most common example for run after interactions is like the button opacity, right? So you click the button and then you have a lot of logic, and the button is just clicked for several seconds before it is unclicked again, and then you should just do run after interactions on this button.
Yeah, could be. Although, yeah, it's like there are not many cases where you actually need to use it, and definitely don't use it as a helper for any kind of interaction.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do some short questions now. I need you to answer me with one sentence. Okay. Would you recommend monitoring FPS, memory, and CPU in production?
Yes. Use Sentry if you care about ease of use, for example, for these.
Okay. Have you measured performance of V8 versus Hermes versus JSC lately, post-Fabric migration?
So we didn't compare these. There are some community benchmarks specifically around V8 and Hermes and JavaScript core from Kudo, who's working at Expo. So make sure to check that. There is a lot of nuance to that. Some engines are faster in some scenarios. So for now, a good bet is to just use Hermes for most of the cases. Yeah.
How do we anticipate and proactively estimate the effort to ensure acceptable performance and avoid last-minute surprises?
Yeah, test. You can use Reassure, for example, or some custom code with Appium if you have QA engineers, for example, and use some good real-time user monitoring like Sentry or Firebase to make sure that your users are also like not affected with the performance issues. And if they are, you can be quickly
Notified
about it. Yeah.
Next short question. Have you come across any surprise performance degradation while migrating Rn apps to new architecture?
Yeah. So there is one that you can follow through. It's around the rendering of text views, and there's some good investigation on the Shopify's a flash list component where some folks from Software Mention are introducing the new architecture support, and they faced some like performance issues, unexpected issues with
Short answer
the
is
new
yes.
rendering
There are
engine.
some some performance issues unexpected
and
sometimes with new
and
architecture.
they are quickly fixed by the core team.
I think let's link the discussion to this specific what you just said about flash list.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
I think that question, the next question, would be a little bit longer one. So hypothetically, if we stopped working on few features and spent a year on performance, how much do you think our current app's performance could be improved?
Yeah, first thing, don't do it. It's not worth it. But I have like a small story that's from one of our clients, Dream11, where we spent almost 2 months with a team of 3 developers working solely on optimizing some 10 metrics in the chat UI that they were rewriting from native to React Native. And for most of those the metrics, we were able to beat the native implementation, and we needed those almost 2 months to do it. So it required a tremendous effort from a few engineers to achieve that. So was it worth it? I don't know. The UI was definitely faster. So if you can afford it, please do, especially if it benefits your users. But spending a year solely on performance, probably not the best idea.
If your application needs a year of focusing only on performance, I think maybe you'll be better off just rewriting from scratch in this particular scenario. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on.
Maybe not.
Generally, how much can poorly written React affect FPS TTI? A lot. There is no ceiling.
Infinitely.
Yeah, there is no ceiling to this. If you misuse your use effects, that's the most common example. Like your app will not render at all.
So, Łukasz, have you misused use effect in a way that
I have
re-rendered everything infinitely?
Yeah, but it's quite easy to spot, because then you don't see you see nothing basically in your application then.
Yeah, unless it's in some pesky, very nested screen.
Which animation libraries do you recommend?
Yeah, you want to answer that?
Sure. Like, if you do some animations, but not a lot of them, just go with the animated API and use native driver. If you do more animations, use reanimated, if you know how to use it. Then if you have a great graphics team in your company, in your product, ask them to use Rive or Lottie. Yeah, it's dependent on a use case, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Have I answered this correctly? Do you want something to add?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Okay. Last questions for today's episode. What tools do you recommend to analyze APKs and IPA size? What is the best to visualize and identify items in the app to optimize to reduce size?
Yeah, so there are 3 layers to that, because we have 3 different bundles on 2 major platforms. So we talk about Android native bundle, iOS native bundle, and JavaScript bundle that's shared out there with those with all of those. So for JavaScript, you can use React Native Bundle Visualizer or Source Map Explorer, for example. On on Android, there's a built-in tool into like APK analyzer, I think, in Android Studio, right?
Yeah, you can use just Android Studio to analyze your app bundle, and I used it recently. It's really nice when you have to remove something from your app and then check how much your app size and what exactly was removed. So it shows you can compare one APK to another to really compare them.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. And on iOS, I think Xcode doesn't really have a good tool for that, but we found a dependencies app. It's in the Mac store. It's for macOS only, obviously, I guess, because it's about Apple ecosystem, and you can visualize the dependencies, like the native dependencies of your iOS apps or tvOS or watchOS. Yeah, anything Apple.
Okay, I think that were all of the questions that I wanted to ask you and answer myself. And again, those were the questions that we gathered during our optimization guide tour in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and in Detroit. I hope you, not you, Michał, but our listeners liked it. And if you have any more questions, please let us know on Twitter or in comments in this video. And I think we should really also link the guide to this show notes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Let's do it.
So thank you, Michał. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and see you in the next one.
Thanks, Łukasz. Bye.